I just want to do God's will.
The kind of revolution that the world needs is a Christian revolution.
If you want a miracle, you've got to expect it to happen.
You're the recipients of God's grace and God's blessings, and you rejoice in that reality.
Welcome to Life Today Live. I'm Randy Robinson. Good to have you here. And, the election, we're beyond that. And so I hadn't been talking like political stuff. And the one thing I will say is, yes, my guy did win. Hurrah, hurrah. Yay for me, right? But here's the thing. If you're a Christian and you're in the church and you think that we have somehow won, accomplished something, the battle is finished. No. It just got a little bit easier, frankly. Now is the time for the church to step up and do the work that God has called us to do. And by that, I don't mean the way we vote. I think we should. I don't mean just disagreeing with people over politics or theology or whatever. And again, I'm fine with the appropriate conversations. I'm talking about the actual work in the community where we go out and we meet needs and we do it with the grace and the love of God in our hearts, in our hands, and in our mouths. That's what we need to be doing. That's how we will really change the country, because guess what? In 4 years, your guy's going to be out or someone else will have him be in. They come and go. The church has got to stand, and this is how we stand. We're going to talk about some of these things with a gentleman who has a book out called United in Crisis. It's written by Daniel Geraci. That is also the name of an organization that he has, and he is doing the good work. And I want to hopefully inspire you today, maybe spark an idea that may lead to something big, to do the good works that we were created to do as believers. These are not the ones that get us into heaven. These are the ones that bring heaven down to this earth. Daniel, welcome to Life Today Live. Great to have you on the program.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us on.
So walk us through a little bit of this idea of United in Crisis, both the organization and what you talk about in the book.
Yeah, well, United in Crisis, basically what we're doing is we're taking a model that's been proven for the last 14 years through an organization called Austin Disaster Relief Network, a network of about 200 plus churches in the greater Austin area and well over 10,000 trained volunteers, launched in 2009. But after the last 14 years of really helping out a lot of people across several states and helping launch several other nonprofit ministries similar to what we did in Austin, we finally said we've got to form a new organization that will just primarily focus on launching crisis response church networks across our nation and across the globe. And so that is what United in Crisis does. We work alongside of churches that maybe are in the middle of a disaster, that don't know what to do and how to do it. And we can help them with that organization of that response. Or maybe perhaps it's blue sky time where there is no disaster, but churches are saying, you know what, we're fed up with being divided and being less powerful in our community because we're not working together. Why don't we begin to work together and begin to respond to not only disasters as a form of crisis, but other forms of crisis throughout our community and be the light on the hill, so to speak. So that is what we do. We walk alongside them and help them out until they are thriving in the midst of those situations.
All right, let's talk about the sort of the obvious thing when we think of disaster. We just had hurricanes, and I know that there's been some long-lasting effects there. So what would you guys do, or what would the church network do in cases like that?
Well, in many cases, for instance, we're working in Asheville, North Carolina, with the churches in that community in the greater Asheville area, and they've done an amazing job. I will first say, wow, I've been spending many days there, and I'm thoroughly impressed in the way that God has moved through his church. But like in many cities, they have been all working independently, mostly for the most part, doing what they feel God's stirring them up to do, but they're not collaborating yet, working together. And now is the time when you start reaching into the long-term recovery efforts
Mm.
where we're going to actually begin to help families, help them rebuild, repair. That's when the church really needs to come together to form an alliance, because what we do is we go in there to help the church walk with every single family impacted by crisis. We ask every family, would you like a church in the community to walk alongside of you until you're back on your feet?
Mm.
We have found out of the majority of those impacted by crisis, when they strike, about 68 to 70% of those folks don't have a church family around them, and are usually not believers. So it is the perfect time for the church to say, we're going to get trained, we're going to walk alongside of you, we're going to help you get back on your feet. And this is kind of what we do. We go in there to help train the church to organize that effort, because it's a lot of organization to put all that together. But also, we're going to train them on how to what we call shepherd families. And that way, the everyday person that may be in the pew that could be taught and trained how to help somebody when they've lost everything, when
Yeah.
they're at their lowest point, how to be a light, how to be that good Samaritan, and walk alongside of them. Because ultimately, this is where we see the most people surrender their lives to Jesus. They often say, "Why are you doing this for us?" Which is not a negative question.
Right.
They're just puzzled because they've never seen that kind of love before.
I love it. And, you mentioned the Good Samaritan. And, there's no record in the story, at least, of the Good Samaritan, asking the man who was in trouble, well, or do you believe a certain way, or what did you do wrong to get here? All the judgments and condemnation and the immediate conversion kind of thing. Those aren't there. What there was in that story is the rush to meet an urgent need, and to care for and to cover the costs of this individual who needed help. And I know that that's your starting point,
Yes.
but I love the fact that you do see on the back end, because it just makes sense. And I, it can be difficult, because if we get our motives mixed up, if we get the cart before the horse, we can think that we need to just preach to the people in the ditch instead of pulling them out of the ditch. But this works, does it not?
Yes, it does. And you brought up some really good points. If I can address, number one, what happens is he first has compassion on the person that was left for dead. And if you look at the word compassion in the I think it's 25, 26 version of Webster's, it's to alleviate suffering. If you look at today's compassion word, it's to have a feeling about someone and feeling sorry for them, but zero action involved. It's so radically been changed. And what I love about the Good Samaritan story, it's exactly what the church is called to be, the Good Samaritan of our community.
Yep.
The Lord does, it's no coincidence that it's a crisis that it happens in, right? And so unfortunately in our society today, the government has become the Good Samaritan and the church has become the Levite and priest. And we walk by thinking that the government's got it, it's all taken care of. And that's why I think, sometimes these disasters, what they do, not only, do they wake up the survivor to perhaps to the living God and that he is real through his church, but it wakes up the church to realize that, what, this is what we're supposed to be doing. It is not the role of the government to be that good Samaritan. It looks like you might have a comment there, so I'm going to let you say a few words.
You have no. Okay, so here at Life Outreach International, I know not everybody knows, they're familiar with, but for 30 years now, we've been doing a lot of international missions. We actually do a lot here in the States, but on the air, it's the international missions, because people understand that over in Angola or Cambodia or wherever we're working, that there is no government safety net, or the government has failed or whatever, and they have compassion to action, and they give to help alleviate hunger, polluted drinking water, get girls out of sex trafficking and things like that. As soon as we go on the air with something here in the United States, it's heartbreaking that people don't respond. And I know it goes to this notion that, well, I pay taxes. We have a government infrastructure, and I'm glad that there's a safety net. I don't trust the government. I don't care who's in power. I don't fully trust them to take care of every need of every citizen that has a real need. But I think the biggest thing, and you touched on it, that's why I was reacting over here, is because as soon as the church falls into the trap of thinking that way, not only do we fail to help those in need, we fail to be who God has called us to be, which is his hands and feet to demonstrate the gospel in word and in deed.
Yes.
And we have been lulled into thinking that, and I think we're reaping the benefits. And also the government, they strip all, Christianity out of it by necessity, and so you could argue. But this is, Daniel, we have to do this to be who God called us to be, do we not?
Yes, we do. There is no B plan. There is only one A team, and that is us. And we become a conduit for God's grace to flow through. That job is left to no one else. Of course, he can use a donkey, but he would rather not use the donkey. He would rather use his church to ride on as the donkey, as Jesus did, right?
Yeah.
But, I was going to make a point that many people don't realize, and I think this is why the Lord uses the story of the Good Samaritan in the context of crisis, because this is what's going on. Think about it. Every crisis, no matter if it was a disaster, someone that loses their baby, the person across the street that, maybe lost their mom, whatever it may be, when people are in crisis, I believe God's goodness is on trial, especially if they do not know him. And the devil is right there whispering in the ear, if God really loved you, why would he allow this situation to happen? Or if he exists, a loving God exists, why would he allow this loving God allow this to happen to you? And then you have the insurance companies in time of disaster saying, this was an act of God. So everything is coming against God.
Right.
And so if the church does not show up to reveal his goodness and reveal the beauty of God, what happens to those individuals as they are broken and crushed and walk away? And here we are thinking that the government's going to provide. The government can never provide, and their job is not to reveal the beauty and goodness of God. So this is the sole purpose of the church. And I think this is when we see, again, the most people come into the kingdom is when we not only give them stuff, right? Get them onto our horse, so to speak, or into transportation that works, get them into safe and clean housing, but we walk with them until they're back on their feet. And this is where we see multitudes come to the kingdom. This is the role of the church. We are to step into their reality until it's completed and they are safe and in a clean home. But yet, the worst disaster of all is if we do not show up and all that is done for them, but yet their eternal house is on fire.
Yeah.
That is the worst disaster of all. And that's what we're helping them to alleviate, is from that worst disaster.
I think that's exactly it. And when we think we should have one without the other, we're just missing what Jesus taught, literally right there in a parable, to dumb it down so people like you and me can get it and then act on it, right? All right. We need to be united in crisis. That's the name of the organization. That's the name of the book by Daniel Geraci. You can pick it up wherever you get books. And I'm curious, I have no idea, Daniel, your denominational affiliation. And I mean, on some levels, I really don't care. But what I find is that when you get into a crisis situation, ain't nobody cares, right? Someone who needs help now, they really don't care. But I do think, and anybody who's going to get mad at me and talk about ecumenicalism can just go safely by the guy on the road, say, Lord, I'm glad I'm not like these sinners, and just keep going on your way. All right, that's fine. That's in the story too. You can be that guy. But I do think that it's critical that we come together across these theological lines, and I get it. I value doctrine, I value theology, but there's got to be a commonality of coming together and working together, which I think on the back end actually helps, because not everybody you reach is really going to want to be a part of your particular brand of church, but there's another one in the community that God can reach them through. How has that worked for you?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. You had asked what denomination. I'm non-denomination, but I used to be Catholic. That's kind of where I was born and raised into, and then the Lord had me move to a non-denominational church over the last 20 some odd years. But the beauty about a church network is that all the churches on the network are autonomous. They get to be who they are. No
Yeah.
one is going to be forced to change. We just get to work together. And you're so right. No one ever asks in Austin, Texas, hey, what, because we're all wearing one shirt with one voice, one mission, one purpose. So beautiful to see. And no one's asking anymore at that point. We're just helping each other out. We're rolling up our sleeves. We get to do this together. That's the thing. And the Lord always does his part. When we do our part, he always does his part, which is it says in Psalm 133, commands a blessing. And this is where the church begins to look good. Now, he makes you look like you know what you're doing. That's the honest truth. But we see miracles, signs, and wonders when simply we'll just humble ourselves, obey what he's asked us to do. And yes, he is the first responder, the last responder, and he never leaves. And it's going to really help the church become absolutely relevant in the community. Because, see, the reason why the government, I believe, is that Good Samaritan is because they work together. They're
Hmm.
powerful. The money comes. Well, when the church begins to work together in the community to take on the crisis, see, there's some large donors out there that want to give towards the efforts of the church, but because the church is divided, and if I'm a multimillionaire, I'm probably not going to give that big chunk of money to my own church. Not sure if they're even going to be able to handle that right.
Hmm.
Man, if there was a all united network of churches working together, it will begin to attract funding. And again, this is part of the commanded blessing, I believe, where there's those kinds of supernatural signs and wonders, where ultimately this is where the church should be the greatest asset that the government, community, county should have. And in fact, in Austin, we're actually seated with the police, the
Yeah.
fire, EMS in their command and call center as one of the key entities. The mayor calls on us when
Yeah.
there's need. At least now I'm not the ED of that organization because I had to run
Right.
United in Crisis and
Yeah.
help train, teach what we're doing. But this is where it should go. We should be on top of the mountain, so to speak, rather than being under the mountain and being led by the world.
That's interesting. Do you find as you go to different areas? I mean, because people are going to think, okay, he's in Texas. Yeah, the local government's going to be friendly to the church. You're in Austin, Texas. For people that don't understand, the two are not necessarily always on the same page. And on the local level, maybe, but as you go to different areas, do you find the necessary government entities are favorable towards you?
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. So I'm going to answer it in two different ways. Austin is the second most liberal city in the nation based on stats. That's Portland being number one, Austin two, San Francisco three. Now, I'm not sure how that happened, but in Austin, Christianity is not always favored.
Right.
In fact, it was a battle for the emergency operations director, and he would often tell them, until you find someone better than them, this is who we're using. Because we work together, we're unified, we're a large army. I mean, who could say no to that? But going to other cities, this is the honest truth. This is what it's like when we're not together, not united, not trained. The majority of the governments in cities say the church is the second disaster in a time of crisis because we don't have the training, we're not working together, and
Mm,
it's a mess.
mm,
But here's the good news. If we're trained, we're working together, we're united, we become their best asset in any city. I tell you that it doesn't change, it doesn't matter, because what's happening is when we make them look good, they love us. And we're sloppy and we're
yeah.
not together, we're saying the wrong things when we're preaching the gospel on the first few minutes of the disaster,
Sure. Yeah.
which is
Right.
not the right time to do it because they're standing in rubble. I mean, they're overwhelmed and their brains, they're traumatized. They may have just saw someone die. That is not the right time. But when we walk with them through the process, that is the timing, after they're pulled out of their trauma, after they've got some food and water. But see, this is some of the problems that you see out there. It's really sad. I had no idea until I got into the
Mm,
business to hear that from leader after leader after leader within the government. So that's what the training and why we exist, I believe, is to help the church become that great asset for their community.
You know, if we believe we should do everything with excellence, we should help the community with excellence too. And you know,
Amen.
I was in, I think it was in Mozambique years and years ago with our missionary partner Peter Pretorius, and I was kind of asking about the gospel and how you preach it in these out of the way villages in different languages, right? And I don't I remember exactly what I said, but I kind of leaned in that direction of well, don't they really need the gospel? And the answer is yes, but he
Amen.
goes, well, it's really hard to preach the gospel to someone who hasn't eaten in several days. It's hard for them to hear the gospel, I think is what he said. It's hard for them to hear the gospel when they haven't eaten in several days. And that said, okay, let's meet their immediate need. Again, right back to the Good Samaritan. Let's meet that pain point, and then let God work after that. Because here's a principle I know. It says in Proverbs 19, verse 17, whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deed. Now, God has everything. We don't need he doesn't need to borrow from us, right? But
Amen.
what is he saying? He's saying that when you're generous to the poor, I will look at it as a loan. Not that they owe you something, but I will repay it for you. And you go, okay, I mean, if that's God's idea of what it means to be generous to the poor, you know, and I can go on and on because it's all through the Gospels. It is the gospel, I would argue. But when we do that, the work you're talking about, the poor doesn't just mean people without money. It means people without. And in any crisis, people are without. Has God blessed you?
Yeah, oh my gosh. If I can give you a story, and then I'd love to share kind of a picture of what I'm talking about, but the quick story, God's story, in 2017. So we have 30,000 square feet of warehouse space at Austin Disaster Relief Network. And our warehouses, the supplies were kind of getting low, and we were asked to help another city that was impacted by crisis by sending them 2 truckloads, semi trucks of stuff, and this would pretty much wipe out everything we had. And you know, as executive director of the organization at the time, it's always nice to have a full
Sure.
warehouse when you have donors come in and all that for show, right?
Yeah.
Just it
Yeah.
looks a little bit better, nicer. Well, anyway, I said, give it all away. I first like, oh gosh, but I said, just give it all away, leaving just barely anything on the end. But you know what it says about you cannot outbless, right? When we give to those in need. Well, then Hurricane Harvey happened, and I'm telling you, boy, did the windows of heaven not pour out. We
Mm.
ended up having to open up 8 warehouses. Of course, our father owns all the cattle and all the hills. So if you need
Right.
warehouses, he owns them all. So just ask him, Father, for them. But we ended up shipping out 4,675 pallets. That was 205 semis of stuff
Wow.
way beyond what we could ever imagine. Prior to that, the most we'd ever shipped out was 2 semis, and now we're suddenly shipping out well over 200 in probably a couple months. And not us didn't pay for a single truck, didn't pay for a single airplane dropping off those supplies. God so supernaturally supplied, and that's the very evidence of what you just talked about. The second thing I wanted to bring up was this. If you can imagine, this is what I'm talking about, because so many people don't have a grid for what I'm talking about. Imagine the body of Christ in your city, the moment crisis strikes, whether it's a disaster or something impactful in the community, suddenly those survivors call the survivor hotline. Yes, with Christians running the survivor hotline, we normally took anywhere from 1,000 to 20,000 inbound, outbound calls, full-blown call center for the body of Christ in your city. They're praying with them. They're making sure their needs are met, immediate needs. They're giving info. So that's a touch point,
Mm-hmm.
loving them there. Then the next point, we're sending them out to clean up their home. Maybe their home was destroyed by a flood. A team is going out, loving on them. A Bible's given. They're being prayed for. Touch point number 2. Touch point number 3 happens when our crisis intervention team launches a what they call multi-agency resource center where many agencies come together. The survivors get to go along all those different agencies to find what their needs are met. But this is an area where they're prayed for if they haven't received a Bible. And that's when we begin to say, would you like a church to walk with you through this crisis? So all these touch points begin the process of them going, I didn't realize the church was this amazing.
Yeah.
They get a wristband. That wristband now takes them to, we had a thrift store run by the church in Austin. And so they got to shop for free. Well, all those people are loving on them, blessing them, praying with them. Then it's still not over. Then there's the big warehouse if they need bigger items too. Now a shepherd calls them who's been trained to walk with them until they're back on their feet. And then lastly, their house is going to be rebuilt by a team of wonderful Christians. See, it's just like a restaurant. When you walk in, the goal is, how do we get you to come back? With the Christian community, why not set it up where all these touch points are the avenue, the pathway that survivor goes on? They don't meet Jesus on that first call or maybe the second point or third. By the time they are shepherded or by the time that their house is rebuilt or repaired, this is when we see them come to the Lord. But see, there is an intentional pathway when you raise up a crisis response church network in your community, no matter what type of crisis it is. These are all the same touch points where they are wowed, and hopefully, ultimately, the church becomes so darn relevant in their community. People begin to say, I didn't know the church was this good. I mean, I always thought it was so broken up and it didn't work together. But why not own that mountain in your city and become the Good Samaritan?
Yeah, I really think that we need to be the Samaritans and not try to be the saviors. And that is something, unfortunately, I've seen because we think it's up to us to get them saved. Only the Holy Spirit can save someone. We need to be who God has called us to be. And this is it, helping those in need. All right, Daniel, let me show people your website real quick. This is the two of us. There's the website right there. And it is unitedincrisis.org, unitedincrisis.org. Last question for you. Someone's watching this, and they're like, wow, this is cool. We need this. I don't know what to do. What can people do to start the process of either integrating what their existing ministries and their churches may do, because many of them have them, or starting this? I mean, what's the call to action here?
Yeah, great question. You started at the right spot, was by going to our website at unitedincrisis.org. On there, we have a link for you to register for a free consultation. We'll spend, the first 60 to 90 minutes with you, just hearing from you, hearing what the Lord is doing in your community, and begin that dialogue and that relationship. If it seems that this is what God is calling you to, we do have a 4-day intensive training, which is step one to take you through to kind of bathe you in the culture of crisis response. And if that feels right to you, and we have this great relationship and it feels good to us, we have a 12-month program where we actually walk with you for 12 months through several phases until your network is fully launched, fully happening, thriving, and doing well. And that's kind of what we do. And we're actually working with one right now in South Africa, in Cape Town, South Africa, and one in Kansas City, Missouri. And so we love to partner with you, walk with you. Also, one of the best things to do, too, is just simply get the United in Crisis book online at Amazon, and that gives you a great foundation, lots of phenomenal stories of what the Lord does. He always shows up when simply the church does her part, and it's remarkable. You can write your own book of Acts for your city just by simply falling under some of those key scriptures that the Lord asks us to follow, and God will do his part through it.
I love it. Check out the book. And the bigger point is get to action. Have your compassion be the original meaning, which is action, not feelings, because feelings don't help people. Actions do. Thank you again, Daniel. I appreciate the work that you do and the time you spent with us today.
Amen. Thank you so much for having us on. It's been a delight.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys watching. So just hit the share button. Just start the conversation. Hey, how do we do this? How do we get better at this? How do we get involved in this? How do we meet people's needs? It will change your city. And it starts with someone taking action. So I pray that you'll take some action. If you haven't liked, follow, or subscribe, that's an easy action. You'll just at least get notifications of more inspirational, informational interviews like this. and come back. We'll see you again next time here on